The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
My baby dolls, we are back again, another episode of Genesis. As always, I am your host, Ian Kahanowitz, and today we're talking about one of my favorite topics of baseball of all time. As all of you know, I'm a huge Yankees fan, living in Red Sox Nation for the last 24 years. I follow the Yankees faithfully, and today we got on the show Sol Gittleman and his wonderful book, Reynolds, Raschi, and Lopat, New York's Big Three and the Great Yankee Dynasty of 1949 to 1953. And you know something, folks? Reading the book, I learned a lot of stuff about the 49 to 53 Yankees. One of the things I learned was, hey, they weren't as great as folklore has made it. We're going to go into that with Sol because, I think it took a stroke of genius, but I think all three of these guys, Reynolds, Raschi, and Lopat, held the glue that stirred the straw that drink that actually held it because the Yankees were in transition at the time. We're going to talk about Casey Stengel. We're going to talk about George Weiss. We're going to talk about Jim Turner. We're going to talk about Lawrence Peter Barrow, otherwise known as Yogi. So stay tuned. But, of course, you are listening to the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. And every day, the Zigzag Man, Ralph Tycho, puts on great programming for you. We got Peter Golenbach in Golenbach University. We got Nancy Finley, again, self-proclaimed niece of Charlie Finley. She was actually like a second cousin. Carl was his first cousin. She does Oakland A's baseball. We got New York Giants baseball. Hey, we got Philadelphia Athletics baseball, Philadelphia Phillies baseball, Philadelphia Stars baseball, everything Philadelphia with Bill Kashatis on Philadelphia ball, past, present, future. We got Dodgers ball. We got Washington Senators, Minnesota Twins ball. We have so many programs, Mark and Mark in the midday. So there's a lot of entertainment, a lot of history, a lot of stuff this network is trying to do to convey the importance and the material that many people, I'd say under 40 doesn't really get. It's a teaching network. I'm honored to be a part of this. My show now is winding down for this season. Next week, before the holiday season, I got about 3 more shows. All this stuff will be published probably in and around by the end of the month, early January, and then when the school system starts back and my twins go back to 4th grade, I start again on the show for what I like to call the run to summer vacation from now to June. So we're going to be ending the season soon, probably next week, like I said, and plus I got jury duty. I don't know, Massachusetts makes lawyers serve jury duty. I just don't know about this, but hey. But Sol Gittleman, hey, he's retired, but he used to be a history and literature professor at Tufts University. He's hanging out in colonial Lexington, which is great because Lexington and Concord's basically where the American Revolution began. I'm about 40 minutes south of him. He wrote a wonderful book. We're going to get into some Yankee baseball history. Without any further ado, welcome to the show, Sol. How are you today, sir?
Thank you very, very much. It's an honor, pleasure to be on your program.
Oh, it's, you know something? I love Reynolds, Raschi, Lopat. These guys are not in the Hall of Fame. What the heck's going on with this?
The Hall of Fame is very limited in its capacity to be imaginative. The 3 of them should be in on one plaque, but Cooperstown doesn't do one plaque. Tinkerstead is a chance with 3 ordinary ball players, but together they made history. They should be in on one plaque. Trammell and White should be in on one plaque. That was 18 years as a double play combination. But Reynolds, Raschi, and Lopat, they did something that'll never happen again, 5 consecutive World Championships. It'll just never happen. Baseball made it impossible. And they're all journeymen. They were all journeymen. They were old men already when they came to the Yankees. The youngest was Vic Raschi at 28, 29. And the other 2 were trades and journeymen. They just had magic in their synergy together. So you picked it out, and I'm delighted, Ian, that you saw it.
And you know something? I read this book during the summer. Every day I had to go to the pool with my kids. I read little by little because there's a lot of information in here that's very important. And one of the information I'd like to talk to you is about these three, along with Bill Dickey, helped shape Yogi Berra into the catcher that he would become.
They called it the project. In the 48 season, Berra played more games in the outfield than he caught. They had almost given up on Berra as a catcher. In fact, opening day of the 49 season, he was on the bench. Gus Nyerhoff was the starting catcher in opening day of 1949. And Berra came in, pinch hit. I think he singled or homered. He got in, and he got in, pinch hit for Nyerhoff. Then he was off and running. But they would not let him call signals for the first half of the season. Berra would not call a curveball with the man on base because he was afraid. He had been almost run out of the league by Jackie Robinson and the Dodgers, who'd ever beat him. But when Berra got behind the plate, Reese and Robinson and Cox ran like crazy. And in the exhibition games, the 47 World Series, they really stole Yogi's underpants. And so Yankees had given up. And then in 48, at the end of the 48 season, they got Jim Turner was managing on the PCL in the West Coast, and Stengel's first move was to get Turner. Stengel and Turner were close, and Weiss was close with Stengel, and so Turner came in, and then Turner was the one who brought Raschi up in the mid-season in 47 and saved his career, and it was a miracle that the three of them. Then halfway through the season, they tell Berra, "Okay, you could call the next inning," and Yogi learned from these three guys. And Stengel was told by Turner, "Stay away. Don't you take care of everything else. You leave the pitching to me and to these three guys." And that's what happened.
And I can't begin to tell you how your book highlights Jim Turner, and it's going to get to my next question. More than Casey, Jim Turner really was the guiding force of the pitching staff.
Stengel knew nothing about pitching. Warren Spahn said that he knew Casey before and after he was a genius with the Boston Braves and the New York Mets. He sent Spahn down. Yet Casey had no idea about pitching, and if he relied on his pitching coaches. He was great with outfielders, great with infielders, great with hitters, but he knew nothing about pitching.
And you know what's sad about with Turner? Turner lived to a ripe old age of 95 years old. He had to bury all three of them. All three of them. He couldn't even believe, standing at Reynolds' funeral. He couldn't even, because I think Reynolds was the last of the three.
Reynolds was the last to go.
And
Jim was there and said, these guys made me. Whatever I am because of these three men. All three, interesting guys in a transitional time when the baseball was going from all white to reluctantly letting in a few black ball players, and these ethnics were there, and they saw what Doby and Robinson were going through, because he used to call Reynolds Wahoo. They called him the Vanishing American because he couldn't complete games early in his career. Raschi was called the Big Dago. Lopat was Lopatinsky. He was a Pole, but he changed his name because they used to call him you Polak, you this, you that. Baseball bench jockeying was in the late 30s and in the 40s an art, and people perfected it. They were nasty, mean ball players, and these three guys got it, but good.
And I know that Johnny Penske up here in Boston, he was lambasted for being a Pole. But let me ask you about...
He wasn't even a Pole, he was Croatian.
Yeah, he was Croatian, but...
But he had rabbit ears. He had rabbit ears, and if you had rabbit ears and you responded or you heard all of this stuff, then they really knew they had you. Al Simmons, who was Polish, Szymanski, his name was, he really got on Pesky. And he called him, you little Polak this, you little Polak that, you cruddy, you turkey, you big... And finally Pesky blew up, and then Simmons knew he had him. So you had to be careful who you were how you pick people up who were targets. Greenberg had rabbit ears. You Jew bastard, you this, you that, you kike, you sheeny, and he heard it all, but he managed to suppress it, went out, hit a home run, never affected his playing. After the game, Greenberg would go in to the White Sox clubhouse or whatever clubhouse, said, who called me a Jew bastard? Greenberg was 6'4", 230 pounds, and mean. So he walked in with a baseball bat in his hand. Nobody came forward. Nobody said anything. So it was a tough time to be an ethnic, and it was a tough time to be black.
And you know something with Greenberg, he could have had so much more of an illustrious career, but he served all 4 years in World War.
He went in, yeah. He got drafted after he got enlisted. He enlisted, then he got discharged, and the next day he got drafted.
It's crazy, but the thing, when he did come back, he ended up on Pittsburgh.
But look, that's the way baseball was in those days. Here's a guy who in 1946 was the RBI and home run leader of the American League. And he got waived out of the league. All 15 teams, he got waived out of the American League. All 7 teams waived on him.
Yeah,
because Briggs was one of the club, and Briggs said, do me a favor, don't anybody claim him off waivers. And all 7 of the owners said, okay. I mean, the Yankees could have had a Jewish ball player in New York City in the 40s. McGraw dreamed of that. But the Yankees waived on him because Briggs was one of the senior owners, and they let him go. 7 teams in the National League waived. They would have waived Greenberg out of the major leagues. But the last place team, the Pittsburgh Pirates, was so desperate, and they had a new owner, a guy named Galbraith. He said, screw you, I'm taking him. And Greenberg then signed with Pittsburgh for 1 year, mentored Kiner, and then retired.
And then you know what the strange thing about Greenberg is that as a player he had to fight all these things with being Jewish, the whole Rosh Hashanah.
The whole thing, yeah.
Now he became general manager.
Oh yeah, and he when he testified at the who was the outfield who went to the Supreme Court? God, I'm getting bad with names. It's terrible. He testified at the Kurt Flood case. He was one of the few people who said the reserve clause is indentured servitude and slavery.
Yeah.
He, Jackie Robinson, I'm not sure, one or maybe one other, none of the ball players, neither Williams nor Musial was sort of ambivalent because he was also stuck with St. Louis. He was happy there, but he was stuck. He couldn't, if you didn't sign your contract, you didn't play.
Yep.
It was the ultimate cartel. They owned you. You couldn't play. But all of them testified except Greenberg. He got up and said, "This is slavery."
Yeah, and the thing with Greenberg, though, we're going to talk a little bit about George Weiss, but Greenberg, as a general manager, he stuck by that reserve clause. He nickeled and dimed his players.
Oh yeah, he was a cheapskate and all of that. He was tough with. He was with Cleveland. He was a partial owner, but he did what he was supposed to do as a general manager. When he got out, then he and Veck were the only two who really shut their mouths off afterwards. And they were career baseball people.
And when we talk about the reserve clause, and believe me, I've done hundreds of shows on Marvin Miller, and he's coming up for vote again into the Hall of Fame.
He's dead already.
But he was 95 when he died. But how that man isn't in the Hall of Fame eclipses me. But let's take a look.
That's Cooperstown.
Yeah,
it's not justice.
It isn't. But let's take a look. Let's take a look at the poster child for the reserve clause, George Weiss. Was he a baseball genius? And
Weiss knew talent. I mean, there's no question that getting Johnny Mize off the waiver list, then Johnny Hopp, and then Johnny Sane, building this team of pitchers. He traded for Lopat. He traded for Reynolds. and he brought up a 28, 29-year-old rookie in Vic Raschi. So he was one terrific a student of talent. You know, he was a miserable human being and a nasty guy and a wretch. But when it came to evaluation of talent, he got Bobby Brown. He found Berra. Everybody wanted Berra. Once they saw that he could hit, they didn't care that he couldn't catch. He looked so ugly. Nobody cared. And Weiss wouldn't let him go. You know, so Weiss knew talent.
And Casey was at his funeral, at Weiss's funeral. And he said he could really wreck. But you know something? Weiss was not only a cheapskate, he was a son of a... And I'm not even saying...
He was a nasty guy. But he spotted... Who the hell was going to hire Stengel? Nobody. He was a loser in the American National League. Nobody. He was a joke. He was a clown. And Weiss brings him to the Yankees in 49 after they fired Bucky Harris because he won in 47 but lost in 48. That's how you get fired if you're with the Yankees. And he brings this guy in at a time when the Yankees were in transition, as you correctly said. They were going downhill. None of the sports writers predicted that they would even come in second or third. They were already looked upon as a fourth and fifth place team until they got DiMaggio was on. The Yankees aged very badly in World War II. Joe Gordon, DiMaggio came back an old man at 31. He was an old man at 31. And it was only a question of time. He could give a half a season, give a little bit more, but he was on his way out. And Weiss, his team was interested, and he picks Stengel. And the old-time McCarthy guy said, who is this clown? DiMaggio hated him. Rizzuto hated him. Henrik liked him. And the three pitchers loved him.
And you know what's interesting with Stengel? Again, his major league records were not good. But I got to give credit to Stengel. And one of the reasons why I give credit to Stengel is because he was tutored by John McGraw.
And he listened. He learned from McGraw. He learned platooning from McGraw. Woodling and Bauer were Stengel's creation in left field, and he learned it because he used Stengel that way. Stengel was a 38-year-old left-handed hitter, and he put him in the outfield when there was a right-handed pitcher.
And
he knew how to use Stengel.
But he had success because again, Stengel lived on the West Coast. A lot of people don't know that, but
he was in Glendale. He was already a very rich man when he came to the Yankees. His wife owned banks. He owned oil stock. He didn't need this, but he had baseball in his blood, and he was going to give it. He got another shot in the Oakland. He was managing Oakland in 48, and that's where Weiss said, "I'm bringing you up."
Well, he won the Pacific Coast League.
Pacific Coast, yeah. And Turner was at Vancouver.
Correct, he was. And what's interesting, they knew each other, Weiss and Stengel. I think from even the Newark years. I'm thinking. And
they knew him. They knew Turner. Turner pitched for the Yankees in '43. He was a Yankee. He came up as a 33-year-old rookie with the Boston Bees, I think in 37 or 38. In those days, you stayed in the minor leagues for 10 years.
Yeah,
they must have had 200, 300 minor league teams. They had 20 Division D leagues. Every kid who wanted a chance signed a minor league contract, and that's how people like Branch Rickey made their living. They sold all these guys off and kept the jewels. But Rickey was the genius of all that minor league stuff, and Weiss learned from Rickey also. Look what Rickey brought up. He brought up Musial, Slaughter, Marty Marion, Mort Cooper, Walker Cooper, Whitey Karowski. He brought up the whole damn team from signing them as cheap little young kids. So the genius of all of that period was Rickey. But Weiss belongs in that same league. Stengel belongs in that league. Turner, people who really learned baseball at the feet of the great people of the 50 years earlier.
Let me ask you this question, then. It's a thought-provoking question. With Jim Turner, he had so much success with the Stengel years, from 49 to 59. Of course, Stengel would be gone after the seventh game of the World Series against Pittsburgh. But he had a second stint after he went to the Reds. From 66 to 73, he was harshly criticized by Jim Bouton in his book Ball 4. Why do you think he succeeded with Stengel but failed with Ralph Houck?
You know, the more they write about chemistry, the more you realize that just talent isn't enough. You can occasionally you get a dysfunctional team like like Oakland in the early 70s. The guys with the handlebar mustaches. They hated each other. They fought, they battled, they yelled, and they won. But generally, you need something in the clubhouse that gives somebody character. You got to have leaders. You got to have elderly guys. You got to have it all. The Yankees from 49 to 53 was a miracle of the right chemistry in the clubhouse. You had people like Woodling and Bauer, and the three pitchers, they were the enforcers. They took the young people aside. They took Mantle out for dinner when he was a 19-year-old kid, and then his father died. And Reynolds showed up at his events in Oklahoma. They were both from Oklahoma, and Mantle broke down. When Mantle got sent down, it was people like Reynolds put their arms around. So these guys, and Turner was with the Yankees at a perfect time for him. So look at Stengel. You know, he was just perfect. He could manipulate. He could orchestrate. He had Bobby Brown and Billy Johnson at third base. He could make things happen at first base. He never had a right-handed hitting first baseman, and he never had really a full-time first baseman until Skowron came up. But up till then, he made do with Mize and Joe Collins and Irv Noren and anybody else he could get his hands on. So you had to have. It's a moment in time. It happens at the right moment, at the right time. Turner, those 5 years were magic for Turner. And he'll tell you that. He told you. He said this was once in a lifetime.
Hey,
and then if it doesn't happen somewhere else, you flop.
Yeah, and you know something? It's so uncanny because, Reynolds, Raschi, and Lopat, we know them as the big three. But we forget about Cleveland in these years because they were so overshadowed by the Yankees. But you couldn't beat Bob Lemon, Early Wynn, Mike Garcia, and still effective Bob Feller. How did he?
Feller, they had Narleski, they had Mossy, they had, they were loaded. They had a very smart manager too, Al Lopez. He was very good, but they couldn't beat Lopat. I think Lopat's record against those 5 years of Cleveland teams was something like 33-7. I mean, they couldn't beat Lopat. The junk, they couldn't do it. Poor Lemon, the 54, they won 110 games. They got blown away in 4 by the New York Giants. But and then 48, they managed to win. That was the only team in that period that could really do any damage. It was Cleveland. They had great pitching, and they had great hitting too. The Joe Gordon, Allie Reynolds trade is one of the few trades in history that really benefited both teams dramatically. The 48 Cleveland Indians with Joe Gordon at second base, they won it all. But then the Yankees started in 49 with Reynolds, and it was a great trade for both teams.
And what's interesting here is that the Indians in 1954 had 111 wins. From 1949 and 1953, the Yankees didn't win 100 games.
The Yankees didn't win 100 games. They never had one offensive leader in any category. They were a very journeyman, ordinary team, and Stengel got everything that there was to get out of them, and it worked like magic. It just worked like magic.
And the thing is, they won 103 games in 1954, but fell short.
And Cleveland won by 8 or 9 going away.
But the thing is this. In your opinion, through your research and what's been said, would you consider Stengel a genius by himself, or he just had great coaches, a great general manager to assist him along the way?
Without one of those characteristics, the whole thing would have fallen apart. Look at Stengel before the Yankees, and look at Stengel after the Yankees. From 49 to 60, he won 10? pennants and 8 World Series. But with the National League and lousy teams, he couldn't do a damn thing. And then afterwards, he was with the Mets, and he lost 120 games. So it's chemistry. It's chemistry and having just the right amount of talent or talented people who will put out for you. And Stengel was a Hall of Famer because of those 11 years. But if he had not had the Yankees for those first 5 consecutive World Champions, my God, nobody would have heard about him. He would have been just a guy who had a bird in his hat. So he got a good break, and Turner got a break, and Weiss was probably the man with the most talent, but he couldn't do anything with the Mets either. He had the Yankees, and then he didn't have the brains he didn't have any humanity, Weiss. Weiss was just a thinking, effective machine. When he got rid of Raschi in 54, everybody said, "You don't know what you've done." And he said, "I know exactly what I've done." And Raschi was over the hill, but if he had stayed on the Yankees, they might have won those extra 9 or 10 games that would have gotten him up to Cleveland.
And I was going to talk to you about that. Raschi wasn't dumb. He was a college graduate, I think, wasn't he?
Well, so was Reynolds.
But the thing is that he held out, and Weiss decided to play hardball.
Weiss hated that. Weiss hated anybody holding out. Weiss didn't care about winning in 54. Weiss used the 1954 season to pay back, and he was going to take care of all those people that held out. And the first one he had as a target was Raschi.
And boy, as soon as he made his statement, Raschi was off to St. Louis.
They never told him. Raschi found out from a sports writer, what's his name? Weiss told him the year before, don't ever have a bad season. And the bad season was 13-6, I think, and he got rid of him.
And you know what? We forget those days when it was indentured servitude because everything changed in the 70s with the Seitz decision. And
sure. Yeah. Once free agency came, the power shifted to the players, but early on the owners had it and they abused it.
And it's amazing. Reynolds, let's talk about him. He grew up in Oklahoma. Hey, he had some Cherokee in his blood, didn't he?
He was a Creek Indian, yeah. His mother came off a reservation. And they called him Wahoo. They called him, the Red Man. I mean, people everything about baseball was ethnic and racist. That's simply the way it was. They called him, the Great White Father. They did everything. They called him every name under the sun. But if you were an American Indian, you were called Chief. Chief Bender, Chief this, Chief that, and he was called the Chief. Then Mel Allen gave him the name Super Chief. And that was Allie. But he's in the Oklahoma Hall of Fame, the American Indian Hall of Fame. He became a millionaire also. He had oil, and so he didn't have to pitch. But he was a great college athlete. His father was a minister, an Eastern Nazarene evangelical minister, and he went to Oklahoma State. Then it was Oklahoma A&M. Now I think it's Oklahoma State now, or then it was Oklahoma State. Now it's a Stillwater campus, and he got his college degree.
And what's fascinating about reading about Reynolds? He was good with Cleveland, but when he became to Yankee, he became a superstar. And
he was a big disappointment. Yeah, with Yankees, he was a superstar. With Cleveland, they got rid of him. They said they called, as I said, the sports writers, he couldn't complete a game. It turns out he had diabetes, and needed orange juice and something to keep him going during a game. In fact, when Stengel had him in his first year in 49, he started 31 times, and Reynolds was already 32. Stengel said, I'm going to use you this year, but I'm not going to let you pitch past the 7th inning. We got Page, and Page will come in. So Reynolds started 31 games in 1949 and completed 4. So when he announced that Reynolds is going to open the World Series against the Dodgers in 49, sports writers thought Stengel was crazy. Stengel knew that this is my horse. He had Raschi next, but he wanted to start the World Series with Reynolds, and Reynolds pitched a 1-0 victory over Newcomb. with Henrik hit a home run in the bottom of the ninth. So
you know what's interesting?
No, they knew what they were doing, and Turner knew, and Stengel listened to Turner.
And you know what's interesting about Reynolds? He was a two-way pitcher. He could start a game, he could come in the middle, and he could close it out. And he's done that.
He had 43 saves in his career. He'd come in any time. They never know where he was. He was on very rarely on the bench. Always in the 7th or 8th inning, they'd say, "Where's the Indian?" And they'd say, "He's in the bullpen." Stengel would turn around and says, "Where's the Indian?" He called him the Indian. And Lopat would say, he's in the bullpen. If you think, he saw when they saw Reynolds warming up, he could throw for an inning or two any day, and he was a 100-mile-an-hour pitcher in those days. People like him, Virgil Trucks, these were guys who really threw a hard, heavy, dead ball. And Reynolds could blow the bat out of your hand. And he also threw inside. They were throwing at each other. He very rarely hit anybody, but he gave hitters Campanella used to call it jelly legs. When Reynolds threw at your head, your legs turned to jelly.
Yep.
He struck out most of the Dodgers in 49, 52, 53 on taking. They weren't swinging. They were taking pitches because they were so terrified up at the plate.
And
his World Series record, I think, was 7-2.
It's one of the best percentages ever in World Series.
But you're right. He was like Schmaltz, starter and reliever. But he, the Hall of Fame, Reynolds, Raschi, and I don't think they got a plaque out in center field now in that great garden they got out there. Reynolds has got a plaque. Raschi's got the best one-loss percentage in the history of the Yankees. I think it was 107-43. And, Lopat was similar. They very rarely lost. Their PCTs, their winning percentage of Raschi and Reynolds, and those 5 seasons, I think they were, it's unbelievable when you look at the 3 pitches together in those 5 years, how many games they won and how few they lost.
And what's interesting, whereas Allie Reynolds was a heater, Eddie Lopat was the junk man.
That's the way Turner used them. He'd use them Reynolds, Lopat, Raschi. By that time, the 3-game series, the other team didn't know what the hell was going on. Because, Yogi said I could catch him with a Kleenex in my hand. And he says at the end of the 5 years, Reynolds, when Lopat was pitching, Yogi never even called for a pitch. He could catch anything that Lopat threw, and he threw about 26 different pitches because of his arm angle. He changed arm angle from full over the top, 3/4 sidearm, and he threw maybe 6 pitches from each direction. Yogi said he's got 36 pitches.
He did.
And it was a totally different kind. Raschi was a heavy fastball pitcher with a very good slider. Reynolds had a fastball and a deadly curve. And Reynolds, they both scared the hell out of you. And then Lopat, came in with his junk, and nobody could hit him.
Because they're all focused on the fast ball.
They're all looking for the fastball, and he's throwing screwballs, he's throwing drops, he's throwing everything from a different arm angle. And Lopat was the scientist. When they came up, Lopat and Reynolds became very close friends. And because Lopat said, let him hit a ball 380 feet to center field and let DiMaggio and Mantle catch it. Who the hell cares? You don't have to strike everybody out. And Reynolds was already 32, 33 years old. He knew he didn't have much left in his tank, and he learned to pitch from Lopat.
And I'm going to say about Lopat, when he was with the Yankees, because when we speak about Lopat, we can't forget about Whitey Ford, because he was there to groom him. But he
mentored Ford. They were the same kind of pitcher.
And, both lefties and
both lefties, both tricky, both from New York City. But Ford was a bit of a smart-ass kid. Came up, thought he knew everything under the sun. His first time out, he got shelled. And Lopat told him, you're telegraphing your pitches. The way you stand when you got a runner on base, you tip your glove. They know what's coming. You got to learn. He took him into the bullpen, worked with him for 4 hours. After that, Ford learned.
And what's interesting, with Lopat, the thing is, is that Whitey took the learning, but then he was gone for 2 years in military service.
Yeah, he was in the Army. Yeah. But he came back and he fell right in. 53, he was right back in it. And by that time, these guys were way into their deep 30s. I mean, Allie was 36. They never got his right birth year down. He was born in 1915, so he was already 38 years old in 1953. And Lopat was just behind him, and Vic was just behind him. But they were already old men, and they took Whitey under their arms. They saved Whitey from becoming Mantle and and Page. They were all nighttime guys. They were drunk. They chased women. They all that. And Ford got married early, and they told him, "You better stick with her." And stopped it. And Ford never turned into Billy Martin, although he hung around with him. And Mantle, it was Mantle and Ford Mantle and Martin, who after Reynolds retired became uncontrollable. With Reynolds, Lopat, and Raschi there, they didn't get into trouble. But once the guys were gone, they got into too much. They got into plenty of hot water. But they were Billy Martin said he was so terrified of Allie Reynolds that he could barely talk in front of Reynolds. Here's a guy who would go up to DiMaggio and say, "Let's go out and have a drink," and DiMaggio would take Martin out for a drink. But in front of Reynolds, he was scared to death. And Reynolds used that and made Martin the decent ball player that he was with the Yankees.
And you know what's interesting? The whole, because I think those three, Casey said you got to watch the younger ones, Bauer and Mantle.
And they did. These guys watched them like hawks, and it turned out it was okay until they were gone. Then they were gone. Then it was hero worship. And Martin, after he left the Yankees, was nothing.
Yeah, you know what's funny? I got a show coming up in a few weeks on the 72 Tigers when Martin was on that team, and as a manager. Well, he learned from Casey. Look what he
learned from Casey. He also, he used pitches. When he was with Oakland, he burned out those 3 or 4 young kids. When he had Keogh and a couple other, he had some great arms. But he was a very smart guy. But his personality and his temperament, he never could. People like Ty Cobb, Billy Martin, Denny McClain, their temperament and their personalities are their big enemies.
Yeah, I speak to Denny McClain occasionally. His wife is battling cancer.
And look what he could have done. Here's a guy who should have been in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, and he tells me, he's like, "Hey, Ian, I made big mistakes." I said the year I was born in 1970, you were on the cover of Sports Illustrated for being the bad boy of baseball, and you know it all. And he did.
Well, he was also very lucky. Those guys, 68. The 68 season, you had McClain winning 31 games. You had Gibson with an ERA of 1.12. You had Koufax pitching from the top of a mountain in Dodger Stadium. It was the age of the pitcher. Yastrzemski wins the batting crown in the American League with an average of .301. He was the only American leaguer to hit 300. So, when they do that, when they raise the mound and widen the strike zone, they can the owners can create any environment that they want. 68 was McClain's year to shine. He was a great pitcher, but the way the mound, everything was set up for him in 68, and Gibson, and Koufax, and Marichal, and all those great pitchers. The ball was dead, the mound was higher, and the strike zone was enormous. The next year, the owners realized the fans don't like this. So they shrunk the strike zone, lowered the mound, and juiced up the ball.
And by 73, had a designated hitter to put...
Exactly. Because the American League said the people want more home runs. It's the same with the steroids. The owners knew what was going on with steroids. They knew everything. They wanted these guys juiced up so the fans would get the thrill of seeing Bonds and Sosa and all of these people hit home runs. They loved it.
But when it came to taking pills and stuff, it went on in the time.
Oh, are you kidding? The doctors of the teams they used to call them, the pill box. They had a big glass bowl with any number of colored pills in there. Take them, amphetamines, you name it, you do it. Same with the NFL. They'd put those guys out there with injections in them. The players were just, it was like the Circus Maximus. It was like the Coliseum. These are athletes, but nobody gave a damn about their condition afterwards, now at their heads. But in baseball, all through the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, they learned how to slide because they had the pills in their stomach first because they had the pills in their back pocket.
That's right, like Pete Rose and with the Greenies.
Yeah, but they told them, grab a handful of pills, and DiMaggio only had cigarettes and coffee. They didn't have uppers. The uppers came in the 60s and 70s and 80s, and the teams, the owners, the doctors encouraged it. Nobody said anything. So that the idea of steroids is just an extension of that, just like Franken surgery, Tommy John surgery. We have kids, they do it electively now before the arms go bad. We got 15-year-old kids in Texas asking for Christmas presents from their parents. Get me Tommy John surgery. Shorten my ulnar nerve so you can add 5 or 10 miles an hour to my fastball. So the country's a little bit crazy, and that's the way we are as Americans.
Well, back then, let me ask you this question, because this is something...
Back then, it's now.
I know that, but let me ask you this. Back then, with Allie and Vic and Eddie,
yeah,
they didn't have Tommy John surgery. But
no, they pitched with sore arms.
Yeah, and Allie's arm was going to fall off. Let me ask you this. When it came to Stengel, again, he was sidelined. Jim Turner made the decisions. I mean, let's face it. Vic Raschi won 120 games, losing 50 in a 7-year stint with the Yankees, a 7.06 winning percentage. He used Lopat, Reynolds, and Raschi, workhorses. Why did he pick and choose why Ford could pitch? Because Ford didn't get as many starts.
Well, they were going to Ford not early on, but that was Stengel's choice. That was Stengel after, and that was after. In '53, he joined the rotation. In '50, he was with them for the Phillies, and he pitched the fourth game against the Whiz Kids. And then he pulled him and let Reynolds come in and blew away Andy Semenuk in a heartbeat, and that was the fourth game of the 1950. Then he went into the Army, came back in '53, and Stengel in turn decided this guy needed to be protected a little bit. So he never, even after Reynolds, Raschi, and Lopat were gone, until Houck came, he was not a 20-game winner. Ford. Houck started in 60, I guess it was 61. In 61, Ford won 24 games because Houck pitched him every fourth day, not every fifth. And so Houck, but then, by 60, that was 61. By 65, he was through. He blew him out.
And you know what's interesting about Ford? Within those 5 years in 1960s, he won over 100 games, and he won 100 games in 8 seasons. He's the only pitcher to win 100 games each in both the 50s and
That's right. Yeah. But the pitching finally at the end wore him out. Pitching every fifth game, every fourth day. He won games, he pitched much more, but from 61 to 64, he was effective. After that, forget it.
64, he got injured, and then he had to start cutting the ball with his wedding ring, and then
then he started cheating, and he did whatever he had to.
And he still, 67, I think he pitched one inning, and that was his career.
He's great, a wonderful, great pitcher, limited, screwball, threw everything great, typical smart left-hander, and but Stengel was going to preserve him. And Turner also thought that he was light, slight, and much more, although he threw a faster fastball than Lopat, still he was going to conserve that arm, and Houck didn't agree. Houck wanted him pitching every 4 days, and he did. Gave him a lot more wins, and it shortened his career.
And you know what's interesting about all three of these guys?
I don't think he pitched 200 innings until Houck.
Yeah, he didn't. he was used sparingly because he had to be going up against the Indians, the White
Yeah,
Sox.
always against the best teams.
Yeah, and the Tigers.
But the team, that was supposed to be the dynasty team in the 40s when the Yankees got going with the Red Sox, not Cleveland. Red Sox had everybody. They had 20-game winners. They had great pitching. They had great trades that they made with the Browns. They got Al Zarilla. They got Vern Stevens. Stevens and Williams tied for the home run and RBI league in 49, and they still couldn't win a pennant. They had power. They had everybody, but they just couldn't push the Yankees off the top.
And you know what's interesting? Let me ask you your take on this. Joe McCarthy. I mean, great manager.
A great manager with the Yankees.
Yeah, and he couldn't do it with the Red Sox. And the Red Sox
by that time, he was already a drunkard. He had problems. He was an alcoholic, and he was at the end of his rope. Stengel was falling asleep on the bench in 1960. Stengel said, "I'll never make the mistake." When they fired him, he said, "I'll never make the mistake of becoming 70 again. I'll never do that again." He got to be an old man. McCarthy got to be an old man and quit. But he was sitting there drinking out of a brown paper bag on the Red Sox bench. He lost it.
He takes the fall for the summer of '49. He takes the fall.
Yeah, it wasn't his fault. It wasn't McCarthy. McCarthy, there you could have also been a push-button manager. You were loaded. The Red Sox were loaded. They had Parnell winning 20 games. They had Kinder winning 20 games. I guess you could fault him because he overworked them. At the end, it was Kinder and Parnell. By the time he got to the last week of the season, they were burned out. So they lost those last two games in Yankee Stadium. They came into Yankee Stadium for the final two games of the 49 season, one game ahead, and left Yankee Stadium one game behind.
It was unbelievable because in 1950, they were all healthy, the Red Sox, and they were they were the ones.
Still couldn't do it. Nobody picked the Yankees in 1950.
No, they didn't. They thought that this was just a fluke in 40.
So they thought it was a fluke, and then 50, and then 51, and 52, 53. So it was interesting times, and nobody could push the Yankees off the mountain.
And they did not have, and I want to stress that point, they did not have any stellar, superb teams like it's in folklore now.
No, there was no great star. DiMaggio was half the player he was, and he retired after the 51 season. At third base was always Bobby Brown, who could hit, and Billy Johnson, who could field, and he used them. Rizzuto was old. He had an arm like a feather. Balls barely arrived at first base in time, but he had the best hands in Major League Baseball, and he was the best bunter in the history of the game, probably. He could drop a bunt down the third base line so deftly that you should see. I'll send you a video of the 53 World Series. You see, there's a shot there of Rizzuto dropping a bunt down the third base line, and then Cox threw him out by half a step. It was fantastic. But they didn't have much talent. They had Billy, what's his name? Jerry Coleman at second base. He was 149 pounds, soaking wet, chain smoker. But it worked, and they platooned at first base. Henrik was an old man in the outfield. Woodling and Bauer platooned. DiMaggio was an old man. And then when Mantle came up in 51, he was hitting leadoff and breaking water fountains. He was flopping miserably. They sent him down to the minors and brought him back, and he finished the season. But he was hitting leadoff. Rizzuto was hitting second. They didn't know what Mantle was going to do yet. So it was really a team in transition and ordinary, except for the three pitchers and what they did with Berra.
And let me ask you this. Let me ask you this. The three pitchers not only had this chemistry on their field, but off the field with their wives as well.
They were close friends. They all lived together in New Jersey. Berra stayed in New Jersey. Berra moved in with them. So you had Berra, Reynolds, Raschi, Lopat, all of them living close by. Reynolds would go back to Oklahoma for the season. He was really in Oklahoma, and his wife, I remember, was also an Oklahoma a great woman athlete, great golfer, and they loved Oklahoma. Raschi married a woman named Sally, and she was from Finger Lakes district, so they would go back up to the Finger Lakes. But all year long they visited each other. In fact, the only one left alive now is Sally Raschi, and everybody, Bobby Brown still calls her. When she heard Jerry Coleman died, she went, she's 93, 94 now, Sally Raschi. But they stayed close forever. They met after they all retired. They met in New York. They'd go out to have weekends together. They remained, and Turner made trophies for them. Trophy said, you guys are my hero. You were my money ticket. And so Turner was indebted to them. They stayed friends. Coleman, Bauer, Woodling, Jerry Coleman, they all stayed very, very close to one another.
Out of all the trifectas in Major League Baseball, and I'm talking about Glavine, Maddox, Smoltz, I'm talking about
sure.
Hunter and Vita Blue, we're talking about prolific pitchers. Do you think they were the most prolific, Reynolds?
Branch Rickey is a lot smarter than I am, and he said the rotation of Reynolds, Raschi, Lopat, and Ford is the greatest pitching staff in the history of baseball.
That's saying a lot, especially when...
That's saying an awful lot, but those four guys, to see the results, I mean, what the hell did the poor guys at Cleveland do? They got beaten in 4 games by the Giants. What is the long-term impact of Smoltz, Glavine? They won 1 World Series. These guys produced 5. And they beat teams like the Dodgers, who were fantastic. The Dodgers of Jackie Robinson's age, that was Snyder, Hodges, Billy Cox, Fiorillo, these guys were dynamite. And they had Erskine, they had Newcomb, they had great pitching, which all of them wound up with sore arms because Rickey didn't know much about pitching. He thought he did, but he had them all throwing over the top. And they all developed sore arms. But the Yankees beat the best teams in baseball in the World Series. They were just...
Now we're coming to
so I think I agree. Over a period of years, 5 years, this is unprecedented in Major League Baseball history, and it'll never happen again. And these guys are forgotten. There's no memory in America, and nobody remembers these people except 83-year-old people like myself. And you're doing a great service because you're resuscitating some memory.
And it's funny because when I was younger, I got my master's in history, and then I went on to get my law degree up in the Mass School of Law, and then I got my master's in tax and accounting. But I made sure to get folks like you on the show because this is a very important part of baseball history. If there's one thing you want the listeners to know about how prolific and how Reynolds, Raschi, and Lopat made their history with the Yankees, what do you think it would be?
Well, in many ways, each one has his own story. And Reynolds and Raschi's parents were Italian immigrants. Lopat's parents were Polish immigrants. Reynolds' parents were American Indians. And if you have one thing that shows you the transition, when they were looking for a representative for the American League and National League to talk to the owners who were owning baseball and wouldn't even meet with these guys, they picked Reynolds and Kiner. They picked Reynolds and Kiner because they were 2 independently wealthy guys. And they would go to the owners and say, and bang on the table, said, "You don't tell us what to do. We're going to tell you what to do." And the owners, they didn't want to even talk to these guys. But you had to look for character in baseball. Allie Reynolds, Vic Raschi, Eddie Lopat, each individually had character. But people like Ralph Kiner, took the leadership of the National League and said, you got to give these people money for spring training. They come into spring training, they got no money. The owners didn't want to give them a nickel. So I'm always, because of my age, I'm interested in that transition, and also how you dealt with black ball players come in, then Clemente coming in the late 40s, early 50s, also the Latino ball players, and then these ethnic white guys. How are they dealing with them? Polish Americans, American Indian, Italian. It was a wonderful period of transition, And when I think of them, I think of the period of American history, because you still had lynchings in the South in the 40s and early 50s. And there were laws in the states that said white people can't marry people of color. Well, Reynolds was mixed race. So I think of the three of them, the time, the period. Turner, 33-year-old rookie. What's his name? Casey, a failure as a manager in the major leagues in the 30s and getting another shot with the Yankees. Just an amazing period of time. So I think of all of them collectively, but I think of the fact that there's no memory of them anymore. It's sad.
And it is sad. But you know something? I want you to hold the line because I'm going to end the show. I'll speak to you about a minute after I close the show. I know we could find this book at Amazon. I know it's still available at McFarland because I'm well equipped with McFarland. I've seen it in the latest winter edition. Reynolds, Raschi, and Lopat, the New York's Big Three, and the Great Yankee Dynasty of 1949 and 1953. Go pick it up, folks. The holidays are coming. Keep your baseball fan warm this winter. Even though a lot of people don't like the Yankees and they say, hey, it was like rooting for U.S. Steel, this is a book to get because it shows you, even in a time when money was not the factor to play, these three guys gave it all against all odds when their bodies were breaking down. They were so dedicated to baseball. It's a fantastic read by Sol Gittleman. Thank you for being on the show today.
My pleasure.
Oh, it was great having you. Just hang on. And folks, go out, get this book. And as I always end it, Sol, in the immortal words of Edward R. Murrow, good night and good luck.